Good evening, everyone. My name is Rod. I'm the organizing director with Abundant Housing. And you probably have gotten emails from us about this event, so we're really excited. This is our first ever event with one of our grassroots urban plans, and it's in a very nice area of the city that is really growing. We're looking forward to tonight. We're going to have Leonora, Anthony, Lauren, Alyssa, Mehmet, and Mark, who will all be speaking tonight about various topics, from just our organization to the history of the area, to this plan, to how it came to be, to what it means for someone who lives in the area to see something like this. And then we will be taking Q&A and having a dialogue around people's thoughts, concerns, or comments. We're going to try and do it, in less than 90 minutes, given that people have been on Zoom all day and we don't want people to be zoomed out. But we just ask that you bear with us. Please, as we're going through this, any questions you have, please feel free to submit into the Q&A. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to Leonora to get started.
Thanks, Rod. So 2020 is a year where we are facing the consequences of long-term failures to plan for the future. Nothing's more symbolic of that than this housing crisis, which represents decades of failure to address exclusionary zoning and make sure that we're producing enough housing to meet everyone's needs. Homelessness was bad before this pandemic, and it will be on another scale at the next homeless count next year. My name is Leonora Kamner, and I'm Executive Director of Abundant Housing LA. We are a growing movement of people demanding more homes to address rents, traffic, and climate change. We invite those who want a better housing future for LA to join us in changing the housing conversation through our events just like this one. Together, we'll build a city that reflects our values and respects human life and the environment. Through plans just like this Purple Line plan that we're going to talk about tonight, and our other plans, including the Fair LA plan, our housing element update distribution for the city of LA. So welcome everybody to this Friends of the Purple Line launch event. Abundant Housing LA is a volunteer-driven organization, and this event is a perfect example of a successful volunteer effort. The work that we do at Abundant Housing LA would not be possible without people like our Friends of the Purple Line allies and the volunteers involved with that. This is a positive model of grassroots, locally driven community change, and we need more people to stand up in their communities for housing justice, just like Friends of the Purple Line does. Ideally, we need to recreate this model in every single neighborhood across the county to demand a better housing future for everyone. So I encourage everybody to reach out to Rod, during or after this event, and see if there are any opportunities in your area to get involved. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to become a local leader, speak out in support of housing, create a plan just like this or an initiative. And so I just want to encourage everybody to reach out to Rod if that's something that you're interested in, and think about what we can all be doing in our own neighborhoods, and use this as a successful example. So that's my spiel. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Leonora, for introducing who we are as an organization and the work that we do. I'm now going to turn it over to Mark to kick off this Friends of the Purple Line event with a great history lesson. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. And I'm Mark Valianatos. I'm a board member of Abundant Housing LA. And in 2019, I led, along with some of the other leaders of Friends of the Purple Line, a sort of history housing tour of the Miracle Mile area, and just wanted to bring up some of the high points from that for this, to give some context for this discussion. So this area, the Purple Line plan area, Miracle Mile, Mid-Wilshire, is obviously a fascinating place that could we could take an hour just to talk about its history. This is just to start off showing that, some of the early 20th century growth in LA led from, parts of this from becoming like essentially oil fields, farms, to becoming one of the first major commercial districts outside of downtown LA, large housing growth. And so this is kind of the canvas on which this history is painted. I wanted to focus on housing and sort of the interrelated issues of how and where homes were built, and then also crucially who was allowed to live in them. And so if you look at this very, very brief snapshot of some key kind of trends in history in 20th century Los Angeles, you can see from the chart in the top right that the 1920s, we saw a huge boom in housing in Los Angeles that's never been matched since. But at the same time, there was private racial restrictions on individual properties, which prevented usually non-whites, non-Protestants from owning or living in those properties. By the mid-century, you had government actions that were kind of reinforcing that segregation. You had the Homeowners Loan Corporation put out maps showing which were declining or improving or stable neighborhoods, and steering investment away from places that had a mix of races, a mix of apartment and single family homes. Go into that in a little more detail in a second. And then you had later in the century the start of efforts to eliminate some of that discrimination, but you had kind of a set of discriminatory real estate practices continued even when the government was starting to draw back a little bit from its racist practices. And the tragedy and the irony is that by the time we had less discrimination in real estate and in housing in LA, and there was still some, but there was less, you start to have zoning change to downzone the city so less homes could be built. And so when things get slightly fairer, there are suddenly fewer homes and higher prices, and you have kind of indirect segregation through prices as well. And I just want to focus for this 5 minutes on two properties. This first property is one we visited in our 2019 tour, and it's a really cool Art Deco eightplex. It's right south of Wilshire. You can see a big tower right behind it. And the interesting thing about it, it went from like building permit to people living in it in like 3 months in the end of 1930, early 1931. So it just shows that we used to in Los Angeles be able to build homes very rapidly and build them in, you could have a single family house right next to this eightplex, next to a fourplex or whatever. But then also, I looked at, again, those redlining maps of this region, and the text is basically, this one was racially homogenous, but because it had income properties, which is like lingo for apartments in it, they gave it a low blue kind of second tier in terms of of whether the government should be insuring loans there. And then this is a fancy house in the Hancock Park area, but within the within the Purple Line plan area. And this was the first home in Hancock Park where a non-white, or at least an African-American, moved to, and it was Nat King Cole, the famous singer, and his family. They had a light-skinned African-American woman purchase it for them in proxy around 1948, right after the Supreme Court struck down racially restrictive covenants. And then they bought it from that friend of theirs. But even though he was a famous Hollywood star and recording star, the family was targeted, their dog was poisoned, they had, racist flyers put into their house. And it took, over the course of the 20 years, 30 years they lived there, they finally got kind of accepted, but they faced a lot of racism, even as wealthy, world famous folks. And this, the bottom language is also showing how this was rated in that 1940 government survey, that is protected in perpetuity from, integration, essentially, from non-whites. And it was single family residential. And so that combination gave it a green grade, the highest, which shows how the kind of racial restrictions and restrictions on apartments went hand in hand in maintaining segregation. So just to return to my opening point, and I'm kind of old, so I'm bad at means, but I'm trying to do something here. Again, when Los Angeles was allowed to grow and to have space for newcomers and long-term residents alike to find a place to live they can afford, it was racially segregated by private and public action. When there was insufficient but still important efforts to reduce that discrimination and allow more diverse people to live in more places, there was suddenly kind of downzoning, homes became really expensive. You couldn't build apartments in most of the city. And I think this kind of adds up to what President Trump was saying when he said that let's protect our, our wonderful suburban lifestyle. And I hope that through the work of all the partners on this call, there's a turning towards how you have integrated communities, anti-racist housing policies, and combine it with transit-oriented development for a new housing boom that's finally, for the first time in LA's history, open to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for sharing about the history of the area. Next, we're going to have Mehmet speak around the background of just how the Purple Line Friends of the Purple Line came to be, and just the importance of this context, given the history that Mark just shared with us.
Sure. Thank you, Rod, and thanks, Mark. Yeah, my name's Mehmet Berker, and yeah, in terms of kind of the origin of the Friends of the Purple Line, keep in mind we're all kind of volunteers. We're all pretty new and still pretty small, but looking to meet anyone and everyone that wants to join, because A, we need the help, and B, because I don't know, I'll speak for myself. I'm not an expert in any means. And I think, the inspiration was just a few years ago, once, the city announced that, it's going to undertake this transit neighborhood plan for the Purple Line area, for these 3 stops that's going to be, La Brea, Fairfax, and La Cienega stations on Wilshire. Just kind of looking around and noticing an absence of a voice in the space that was saying, hey, we've learned a lot, hopefully, in urban planning. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a planner, but it seems like we should. Are there things that we can do to try and have more homes so more people get to live here? Because the Miracle Mile and Mid-City is a really great neighborhood to live in for numerous reasons that, I'll get into a little bit, but like, how can we get more neighbors here? How can we make this place less expensive? Because I think anyone who lives around here and knows how expensive it is to rent here. How can we make those things happen? And how can we do them in a way that maybe does things that haven't been done before, that is proactively seeking to protect good rental properties and existing renters, and just try and be additive, and just be a voice asking a larger question, which is like, when we look at our city, what are we not incorporating when we want to do something new? So that all leads us to kind of, I'm just going to start sharing. I'm going to start sharing my screen. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you should be seeing a slide that says regional maps. I'm a cartographer by trade, so maps are kind of how I can see things, and it helps me, and maybe it helps describe some things. So, the first thing to notice is, if you're looking at this map, you have kind of the purple caterpillar, which is basically a 1-mile radius around these stations in the city of Los Angeles. The little mouth is Beverly Hills. And the biggest thing is that I'll show you at the end is kind of the shape of the draft area as proposed by the city. And you'll notice kind of how what they're proposing is a gerrymander. And one of the things that we wanted to ask was, well, you walk 1 mile one way, 1 mile one way. Why such a difference? Like, obviously there are different buildings in different directions and different neighborhoods and sub-neighborhoods, but why this gerrymander, and why can't we say, hey, everything within a certain area is obviously near this transit. How can it be proactively planned for, decades into the future in a way that makes sense? So anyways, this is starting off. This is the Cal EnviroScreen metric, which is a state metric of environmental and socioeconomic disadvantages. The areas in red are more disadvantaged, the areas in green less. And this is a statewide metric, so these are statewide numbers. So something that's dark red here is some of the most disadvantaged communities in the state, not just our county. Conversely, some of these areas in green are some of the most well off in terms of environmental justice and socioeconomic advantages areas in the state. Yeah, it's no, Pacific Palisades, but I think it's also important to point out, if you look around the black lines, which are the Metro Rail network, both now and what is planned, you can see that in terms of that network, this is an area that has, in this realm, a lot more benefits. And I think the overarching theoretical framework here is that more people should be able to join into those benefits and should be able to move here. And if you live here now, it shouldn't be ruinous if if you're kicked out of your apartment or if you have to change anyways for whatever reason. So I'll just quickly go through kind of the rest and wrap up here. Mark mentioned the redlining, and one can see here that areas of East LA and South LA, a lot more of the red and yellow, which were deemed, declining and hazardous, as opposed to this area here. Again, you can see how that led to a ethnic composition where, this area is significantly whiter than other areas in the network and other areas in the county. As the kind of same token on the flip side, you can see how it makes it a place where there aren't as many people of color as a proportion as in other areas along the rail network, other areas in LA County and LA County as a whole. And again, drawing from that initial, it's an area of higher income. These are median household incomes for 2018 American Community Survey. You can see it's an area of higher income. So more folks should be able to move here that would necessarily maybe even lower that, because you'd have enough new folks that could. And then here in a similar vein is a poverty percentile, and this is again statewide numbers. So when you're seeing red, this is statewide the most impoverished places versus blue are the most affluent places. And you see again a discernible, and I think should kind of make sense to anyone that looks at the geography of our city. We know about Hancock Park and this kind of bastion of affluence, this kind of this area that sticks out there. Areas of racially concentrated poverty, quickly, again, looking at this as a place on the network where that isn't, where we're not dealing with a community that has had decades and decades of disinvestment from their government, and should be and rightfully can say, hey, that's great that you're planning stuff here, but we already have our fair share of housing, or any other autochthonous arguments that you might hear. We're talking about an area on this network that isn't that. And so what does that mean when we're proposing what we want the next 20 to 40 years to look like? Similarly, again, in terms of like a negation, this is a measurement of gentrification done by the Urban Displacement Project at UC Berkeley, sorry, where again you see a lot of the network are in neighborhoods that are disadvantaged, have undergone gentrification. You can definitely see a portion of this area that has, and it's sad to say that it has. And there's nothing to say that you can't look at a specific area within once you're there, but you can definitely tell that most of this area is not. And when you're looking at the network, that is not something that you can say about all other areas of it. And this is the change in the median gross rent. Basically, the blue are places where the rent has gone up. And we can see here the rent going up, the median rent going up a number of hundreds of dollars. So there's an argument that this place is expensive, it's getting more expensive. So how can we try and counteract that? And then to zoom in, this is the gerrymander I mentioned. This is the current kind of draft plan area as presented by the city. And this is kind of their draft. You know, I made this a while ago to just kind of highlight how much it is following the areas that were yellow or blue, but only on a commercial corridor if blue. And the grades go from green to blue to yellow to red in the HOLC redlining. And you can also see there's areas, they'll probably be hard over Zoom, but there's kind of fuzzy areas. Those are areas of single family zoning or restricted multifamily zoning. And then you have these kind of crosshatch areas of HPOZs. These are areas of exclusion, you know, sorry to say, but that's how it is. And I think to kind of wrap up, you know, the overarching question is, okay, there's an HPOZ here. Well, what does that mean in terms of what can actually happen in there? There's non-contributing structures. Have we asked how all these areas that are, in some cases, like you can see in Hancock Park, you know, near La Brea, you can kind of see at the La Brea station where it goes up on the west side of La Brea, but on the east side, in the Tonier Hancock Park with single family homes, it's not touched. Our question would be like, is that an equitable decision? And what can we do about it to try and make sure that people can live all throughout? And just ending with a few pictures from the walk we did for the Forbidden City tour, I think this gets at some of what we're talking about. We're talking about smaller apartments, quadplexes. These are already in the Miracle Mile, you know, south of 8th Street, and they're fantastic. The good thing is that there's a lot of existing good transit-oriented development from decades ago that serves great and is wonderful rent stabilized housing. That stuff is good. How can we add to it in a way that is as equitable and frankly aggressive in getting more neighbors as we can? So with that, I'll stop sharing and send it on. So thanks.
Thank you, Mehmet, and love the maps. I'm a big map fan, despite not being a cartographer for a living. Next, we're gonna turn it over to Alyssa, who lives in the area and is gonna speak to her experience, both living in the area, but also, you know, what she views and thinks of this plan as a resident.
It's not letting me start my video. There we go. Can you everyone hear me?
Yes, you sound perfect.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. My name is Alyssa Gold. I am the president of the Miracle Mile Democratic Club and a nearly decade-long resident of the Miracle Mile neighborhood. I'd like to thank you all so much for attending tonight and for allowing me to share my experience living here. When we talk about what a transit-oriented community could look like, it looks like the Miracle Mile, an area where shops, restaurants, museums, and parks are all within easy walking distance, where we have a mix of different kinds of housing, but most importantly, where we have a truly diverse mix of people living side by side and getting to know each other. Now, the Miracle Mile Democratic Club has been intertwined with the Purple Line from our very founding in 2013. In the midst of a competitive mayor's race and a county supervisor race the next year, we heard voices in our party telling our candidates horror stories about what would happen if the Purple Line came through Beverly Hills. But we were concerned about that because there was no representation of our voices, the voices of those of us in the neighborhood who knew that having the Purple Line come through would only enhance our walkable, vibrant neighborhood. And we knew that we had to organize this voice and make sure that all of our candidates understood that this was what we wanted. I would share more stories about having these kind of fights within the party, but then we would be here all night. But even though we won that battle, the fight for housing along the Purple Line is only the next step. The Miracle Mile is a prime example of how allowing for dense missing middle housing builds the kind of communities that we envision in a just, equitable city. I myself live in a 5-unit rent-controlled building right along 6th Street that I love and has allowed me to actually, for almost the first time in my adult life, actually start saving some money. But what I don't love is that it is now illegal to build my exact home in so many parts of this neighborhood due to things that were not even an issue back when it was built. That it doesn't have 2 parking spots per apartment, and it's not set back enough from the street, for example. My building would easily fit with room to spare on your average lot in Hancock Park, just to the east, but it is illegal to build pretty much anywhere here. If we want for the most amount of people to live along transit and use that transit, this has to change. We have to allow for the kind of housing that means more than just the ultra wealthy, those who can afford either a single family home or a $3,000 a month apartment can actually live here. In my time on the Central Area Planning Commission, I've come to see that this city makes it so difficult to build anything other than single family homes or huge high rises. I often get asked, why don't we have more affordable housing? Why don't we build bungalow courts anymore? And honestly, the only answer I can give is that that is a feature, not a bug of our system that makes this so difficult, that puts in so many restrictions on missing middle housing that it becomes impossible. We built this system that it requires lawyers and consultants and requires a home builder to lobby their city council member just to get the ball rolling. And that has to change if we are going to build a truly equitable city. This work is so important, both to ensuring our neighborhood maintains its vibrancy for years to come, but also about building the kind of city that takes care of all of its citizens. Thank you all so much again for attending, and I'm really, really excited to work with all of you.
Thank you so much, Alyssa. Last and certainly not least, we're going to turn it over to our Policy and Research Director, Anthony, who is going to speak about what this plan hopes to accomplish. And then after that, we'll get into the fun, which is the Q&A portion.
Thank you for that, Rod. Hi, I'm Anthony Deducis, and again, I'm Director of Policy and Research for Abundant Housing LA. I want to quickly walk you through some of the reasons why we've put this plan together, what we think it's going to accomplish, and why we think it's good for the future of LA. So if you will give me just one moment, I'm going to share my screen, and we can jump right in. You can see it, right?
Yes.
Spectacular. So as everyone on this panel has talked about, we all know that the Miracle Mile neighborhood is much loved. It's a classic part of LA, and it's a great place to live. And pretty soon, when the new Purple Line stations open along Wilshire Boulevard, the Miracle Mile is going to be an even better place to live, work, and play. But the Miracle Mile is not so great if you're looking for affordable housing. This is a map here of median home sale prices in the Miracle Mile neighborhood. And if you look closely, there's an awful lot of M's on that chart. And that's because the median home sale price in the neighborhood is over $1.7 million. So it's quite a difficult place to live if you're not wealthy. And it helps to explain some of the trends that Mehmet showed us earlier on his maps, where the Miracle Mile is wealthier, older, and wider than our city in aggregate. So this kind of situation of high housing costs excludes an awful lot of people. And we didn't think that was right at all. Now, you might ask yourself, well, why is housing expensive in the Miracle Mile in the first place? And the answer is that it's because not much new housing has been built in that part of our city. Now, that's true for the whole city, but as you'll see on this map, downtown has added over 11,000 homes since 2013, Hollywood over 3,000, but there aren't any neighborhoods in the Miracle Mile area that have added more than 1,000. In fact, if you look at Hancock Park, they've added only 60 in the last 7 years. So now the next question is going to be, well, geez, if housing prices are high and it's such a wonderful neighborhood and people want to be near the subway, why aren't people building more homes? The answer, of course, is because our city's laws don't allow it. If you look at this map, this is a zoning map of the Miracle Mile area. The light yellow are blocks where only single-family homes are allowed. Only in a few blocks, the orange ones are where—
Quick question, Anthony. Could you
course.
enter presentation mode for folks so that they can better see the PowerPoint? Thank you.
Sorry about that. Better?
Yes.
Terrific. I can see why this makes more sense. So, as I mentioned, the yellow colored areas on this map are the places where it's illegal to build an apartment building. Not even a duplex is allowed. The orange places are where apartments are allowed. So if you think about it, the city's zoning policies kind of encourage, really limit new housing construction to luxury housing. Because when you think about it, single family housing is luxury housing. And we didn't think this made a lot of sense either. So as we started putting our heads together, we said to ourselves, okay, the city has proposed a Purple Line Transit Neighborhood Plan. It's that funny looking gerrymander that Mehmet showed us earlier, which really is, that would be a plan that's designed by someone whose primary goal is to not upset the people who don't want the neighborhood to change. And so we thought that we could do better than that. And so the Friends of the Purple Line Plan that we've cooked up together is a grassroots urban policy document for making our neighborhood more affordable, inclusive, and transit-oriented. It's certainly a zoning plan, but it's also a housing affordability plan, it's a tenants' rights plan, and it's a mobility and public safety plan. So let's dive into each of those very briefly. So the Miracle Mile is in need of new zoning rules so that more people are able to live near the new metro stations that are going to be opening on Wilshire, which, by the way, all of us are paying for through our sales taxes. So I think we all have a stake in allowing more people to live near them. So along the major corridors in the Miracle Mile neighborhood, like La Brea, like Fairfax, we would allow tall buildings, like the ones that you'd see on Wilshire Boulevard. And in the residential blocks, within 1 mile of the new metro stations, we want to allow small mid-rise apartment buildings and fourplexes, the kind of buildings that you might see on the Forbidden City tour, and the kind of buildings that our city used to build before World War II. It was a good idea then, and it's a good idea now. We think that these kinds of changes together will result in the construction of 36,000 new homes near Metro by 2035. That'd be about twice the number that are in the Purple Line area today. Now, of course, when we're talking about new housing, we also need to talk about the kinds of policies that expand the supply of affordable housing that's affordable to people with low incomes. And so the way that we would do that is through what's called inclusionary zoning. What this basically does is, if someone wants to build to the new building height in these rezoned areas, they're required to set aside anywhere from 10 to 23% of the units specifically for renters with low incomes at rents that they can afford. Now, there's some flexibility in terms of exactly how you do that. You can do it by meeting the needs for the people with extremely low incomes. That's people who make less than 30% of the county average. You could do it by addressing the needs of people with very low incomes. That's 30 to 50% of the county average, or low income, which is 50 to 80% of the county average. But however you do it, you do need to provide units specifically for people with low incomes, just like the city's transit-oriented communities program, which has been successfully delivering thousands of new units of affordable homes near transit. So if we're going to talk about affordability and inclusivity, then certainly we also have to talk about tenants' rights. How do we ensure that renters who have lived in the Miracle Mile for a long time are able to stay? So what we're proposing is to toughen up renters' rights and toughen up tenant protections beyond anything that exists in LA right now. And the way that we do that is, number one, if a parcel has a rental property on it already, so an existing apartment building with tenants, the upzoning provisions that we've talked about wouldn't apply to that particular parcel. And if a building owner still wants to redevelop a parcel like that, they'd have to do a couple of things. Number one, they have to compensate their tenants. We think that they should pay them anywhere from $23,000 to $57,000 depending on their circumstances. We think that the developer should pay the tenants rent in a comparable apartment for a year. And when the new building is completed, we think that that tenant should have right of return. If the tenant wants to come back, there will be a unit for them in the new building at the previous rent. Like I said, this would be a tougher set of tenant protections than anything that exists in LA today. And then finally, if we're talking about how to make the Miracle Mile a more transit-first community and to get people out of their cars, then we've got to think about investments in public space. When you think about a place where you feel comfortable walking or biking or ditching your car, these are the kinds of places that have nice wide sidewalks and trees to shade them. Places that have new parks and plazas where you can eat a meal and be with your friends and enjoy your day. They have protected bike lanes and fast, frequent bus service that it's easy to get around the city without a car. And it's the kind of thing that supplements these new metro stations. And so when we think about how we'd want to transform the neighborhood and make it a better place for everybody, these are the kind of investments that we think should exist alongside new housing policies. So when you put it all together, we think that the Friends of the Purple Line plan is exciting. We think that it's an opportunity to address our city's housing shortage in a way that benefits everybody who lives in our city. We think that it's a playbook for greater housing affordability, housing choice, easier access to jobs and transit. We think that it's a way to have less segregation in our city, less homelessness, less carbon emissions, and less driving. And so our hope is that if we can institute a plan like this and we can make the city's leaders listen, and the Miracle Mile evolves along these lines, well, we think that that's a template for the whole city. Because if you can make it in the Miracle Mile, you can make it anywhere in LA. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Anthony, for sharing. We're going to begin taking questions from the audience. If anyone has any questions, which hopefully you do, after learning about this amazing plan and everyone's perspectives, please feel free to ask. I'm going to ask that Mehmet, Lauren, and Anthony turn on their videos. They will be the people answering questions. One question that we did get already was if someone could define missing middle housing for the audience.
I can jump on that. Missing middle is actually there's not a set technical definition, it's a bit fluid, but it generally refers to anything from, I'm going to call it small scale, 2 to 4 unit buildings, so duplexes, fourplexes, all the way up to like what I'll call just short of mid-rise apartments. So imagine like a 3-story building roughly. Again, different people are going to disagree, but this is the kind of like smaller scale development that's a little bit less expensive to build compared to taller buildings that are made out of steel and concrete, and thus they tend to be more affordable, all else being equal.
Yeah, I think some of the pictures I ended with, I think would fit that bill of missing middle housing. So I don't know if folks kind of remember I showed 4 at the end there. I think those are good examples too.
Thank you both. The next question is, what is the communication strategy to influence the outcome? And at first that threw me off, but then I thought about it. So I'll also re-ask that in a way that I filtered it in my brain, which is, how are we going to go about communicating this plan, these ideas that we have to people to get to this Miracle Mile that Anthony spoke about?
I can start, and then I'd like Lauren to jump in for sure. But just briefly, I mean, I think one of the things was the reason, you know, we talked to Abundant Housing LA is because they were the folks that were advocating on the Expo line transit neighborhood plan, and they were able to get some concessions out of that. And I think there was an agreement that, you know, we need to be a little earlier in the process, and that there are different constituencies. One of them is the city staff, another is obviously electeds, and then the other is the community as a whole, and even the city as a whole. I mean, that's kind of the overarching framework, I think. Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk about any specific ideas or anything like that.
Well, and yeah, that's the thing that we're still trying to figure out different ways to be able to have influence. But when we have met with the city multiple times, they're often telling us that they aren't going to expand on their visions of possibility unless they're getting that pressure from, most notably, Councilmember Ryu and Koretz. So it's a lot about figuring out a way to lobby them to be encouraging the city to be more aggressive and more progressive in their pursuits, frankly. So, and I mean, it's so heartening to see 45 people participating in this first launch. We've been working on it. I just looked it up. Our first meeting was February 12th of 2018, and it's very encouraging to see us get to this stage.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly right. And one thing I just wanted to briefly add to that is that we've been circulating a petition to Mayor Garcetti and to the city council members who represent the Miracle Mile area, asking them to consider our plan. They certainly hear from the NIMBYs. They're very used to hearing from the NIMBYs. And so it's really important that they hear from people just like you about why a transit-oriented future is right for LA and is right for the Purple Line area. So I'm sure at some point someone should post the petition link in the chat, and or we'll send it out to you later. We highly encourage you to sign on if you haven't already.
Thank y'all so much for answering that question. I'm not going to necessarily go in any particular order, just because I'm going to ask questions, you know, based on what y'all are saying. So I think y'all touched on this, but to make it more explicit, there are 2 questions. Someone asked, who are we trying to reach? Is it the Metro? Is it Metro? Is it neighborhood councils, city councils? Is it Department of City Planning? And in addition to that, I think while answering that question, we could also answer Jenny's question, which is, what is our relationship with Metro? Because Jenny mentioned that they have their own TOC projects, and if we have any plans to collaborate with them.
Well, I think so. The first part of that question was talking about the different groups, and then the second part was talking about Metro specifically, as I recall. I mean, on the Metro front, with Metro specifically, that's a good idea. I think maybe she's talking about like their joint development agreements, and I don't know if they have any specifically in this area. One of the things, to be honest, is that there aren't a number of publicly owned larger parcels in this area. There's Hancock Park. There's a parking lot south of Wilshire. That's a city public parking lot. And then there's some properties that are owned by LACMA, but LACMA's using them for their renovation. So it is kind of something where we might, like, we're looking at kind of where publicly owned parcels, there might not be that many opportunities, but I think any opportunities are warranted. And Metro, while not having a direct say, they do have that first last mile planning effort and TOC effort for sure. Then on the other front, I don't know if someone else wants to talk about some of the kind of relationships and discussions we've had and plans so far.
Sure, I can jump in. I guess the only thing I would add to that is over the past few months, we've started sharing the Friends of the Purple Line with the team in city planning that's working on the Purple Line update. We've shared it with a few city council offices. We've shared it with a few candidates for office. And by and large, the feedback that we've gotten is that you need to be able to demonstrate support for something like this, that in a democracy, the elected officials are very attuned to what they perceive as the will of the voters. So not to just give you the same answer again, but that's just why it's so important that on this issue, you make your voice heard.
Thank you both. And I realized that that question probably, even though I'm not answering questions, was probably a me question as the organizing director. We of course are not going to publicly, give our strategies out, but we will encourage you to come and join us if you'd like to know more about our details. But back to everyone's point, I think it is important that we engage with elected officials from neighborhood councils up until the mayor in departments as well. Any more details, if you'd like to know more, again, please come join us and get involved. Speaking of getting involved, Adria, I don't want to mispronounce, asked, have we done any canvassing efforts, or are there plans to start canvassing? They said that they imagined if more renters knew about this, it would be easier to influence council members.
Yeah, for sure. Lauren, I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Have we had? Well, we have not done door-to-door canvassing efforts.
No, we haven't done door-to-door now.
But yeah, I mean, this is a great space to start thinking of new opportunities and strategies we have yet to employ. We certainly have been doing coalition building and working with LA Forward and ACT LA and other organizations, but we're definitely looking to ramp up those efforts exponentially.
Can I just make an open call? I mean, I think I mentioned a little bit earlier how, this has been a little small and there's a lot more we could be doing. I think it's an open invitation to folks, especially folks with expertise or ideas to hop on board. Because I think we could always use it for sure. And I don't know, I don't have necessarily like an expertise in it. I'm imagining during COVID, maybe it's not the best idea to go knocking on people's doors. Like maybe you're not gonna leave a good impression with folks. They're gonna be like, don't come to my house. What's wrong with you? I don't know, but maybe there's different things you do. I know that there's a lot of smart people out there, definitely as attendees on this call. So I think person who asked the question make the point, like that's how you show that support is you have a stack of names when you go talk to them. So for sure.
Thank you so much. Again, another question I'm realizing falls under me. So thank y'all for answering that. Another question by Tom. I'm not necessarily sure the context. I'm happy to promote Tom to a panelist so that more context can be given. But it asks, when would the city's proposed plan go into effect and how long do we have to get it changed? I'm not sure what plan is. I'm not sure what plan is being referenced, if anyone knows, but if not, I'm happy to bring Tom up to.
I would guess that Tom's question is about the city's Purple Line TNP, meaning like how, I'm guessing he's asking how far along in the process are they and how much time do we have to offer different perspective. The reality is that we don't have all the latest information about where they are in the process. And the reason for that is that a lot of things are backed up right now in the Department of City Planning because of COVID. What we do know is that they're in the stage of what's called environmental impact review, where they're doing an analysis to determine what the likely environmental impact of their recommended housing and zoning changes are. And as part of that, they're required to consider alternatives. So actually, I'm really glad you asked that question, because the specific request in our petition is that planning also include the Friends of the Purple Line plan as an alternative scenario in the environmental impact review. That way, when the decision is made by the elected officials, they have an apples to apples honest comparison of the numbers.
Yeah, Anthony, I can share from their website here really quick. As Anthony mentioned, they're in the environmental review phase that they're showing here. So, this is the latest that we've, like you said, kind of have been hearing, but the next steps of the draft EIR and then the final EIR are yet to come. So.
Thank you, both. Luke mentioned, sorry, this is not a question, but Luke stated that the biggest Metro involved projects would come up once construction on the line is wrapping up and Metro is looking to develop parcels that they no longer need for construction, and Metro will be bound by what the city zoning code allows. That's good context for us, of course, as we go into this work. So Kira, going off of talking about zoning changes, Kira asks if we had a map for the proposed zoning changes, like the way we are doing with the community plan updates.
We certainly do. If I'm actually going to share my screen for just a second, because if you visit the, sorry, my computer's lagging a little bit. If you visit the Friends of the Purple Line website, in addition to these gorgeous drawings, you can see that we have something that says read our plan summary to learn more. And if you read our plan summary to learn more, you will find a map of the zoning changes that we're proposing. So we get pretty specific and nerdy here if that's your pleasure. But just wanted to let you know that it's a resource that you have that you can access.
Perfect. And all of these links and resources will be sent out to all of those, to everyone who registered to attend. Another question or another suggestion we got from Kira was also to make sure, as we think elected, great organizing strategy, by the way, Kira, love it. Don't just think about who's currently in the position, but also make sure we think about for those who are running against these people currently in positions of power, to make sure we talk to them as well. Thank you for that advice. And then anonymous person asked, can we talk more about the process of developing this plan? If something like this was created in their neighborhood, you know, what would that look like? What were some of the challenges and exciting experiences you had? And also, I would say for Anthony, if you could also talk about some of the other local chapters in your answer to this question.
I would just want to foreground it really briefly because I think there's something that, I mean, we wanted to make clear is that, you know, this is us kind of putting it out there in the sense that we thought this is the time, you know, at a certain point, you just have to put something out there. And especially now with COVID, it's hard to necessarily have the same kind of going around and meeting folks in the same way. I think there was a desire that we get something out there and then elicit honest feedback. Everything from tough criticism, tough comments to good questions, and incorporate it. I don't think by any means this is like a done deal. And another thing I would say is that, you know, when you look at our map, we talked about kind of treating an area more holistically and universally. One thing I would say about the city's draft so far, and there are good things in the city's draft so far, is that it's just so small and so particular. So they've gone very in depth on certain, literally on like a block, in designing that to kind of look exactly a certain way. But that larger question still hasn't been asked. And I think the big thrust so far has been getting that. And maybe a distinction might be that, you know, the city is doing specific things and more specific things can be done, but that larger framework is just one of accepted of a larger area and just differences in there. So I think there's definitely still room for development, and we definitely encourage it. But heretofore, the process was meeting, asking experts. Abundant Housing is blessed to have some experts in the field that are friends, that are board members, et cetera, trying to just develop something internally. And then we definitely held meetings that were open to folks, to try and elicit some of that feedback as well early on. I would look to Lauren and Anthony to fill in, but that just kind of wanted to foreground that and make sure that that solicitation is out there because it's honest one. So.
Sure. The one thing that I would add to that is that the kind of block by block analysis of what would happen, how much more housing would be created under new zoning rules. That was something that we were able to do using a land use software program called Urban Footprint, which if you're a data nerd or you're a planning nerd is a very, very fun tool to use. And so I would also just echo what Mehmet said, that this is a version 1. We know a lot, but we certainly don't know everything, not even close. And none of us is as good as all of us, which means that it's going to take all of us to provide honest feedback, guidance, so that we can incorporate that kind of knowledge and other perspectives to bring a project like this to fruition. Actually, one other thing I did want to mention to more fully answer Rod's original question is that now that Abundant Housing is starting more local chapters, so we recently founded a West Side chapter, we recently founded an East San Fernando Valley chapter. As some of these chapters have seen opportunities for rethinking zoning, like, for example, the West Side community plan update process is underway. There are similar efforts happening along a new light rail project in the East Valley. These chapters have been asking the same kinds of questions. Hey, how can we create a grassroots urban policy plan and take our vision to the stakeholders? So I think in the coming months, you'll see something like the Friends of the Purple Line plan in other parts of LA too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And yes, We have lots of local chapters that are up and coming, both within the city of LA, but also in surrounding cities. Again, if you'd like to get involved, please get in contact with me, and my email will be distributed to each and every one of you. Another question that I'm excited for, I always love this piece. What kind of enforcement or teeth would this plan have? And if zoning changes are implemented, will changes actually occur? I believe that is definitely an Anthony question.
Okay, if you're going to put me on the spot. So I would break it down into two categories here. The zoning changes themselves greatly facilitate and create the conditions where new housing can be built, but it certainly doesn't like force any developers or investors to actually build the housing. They have to decide on their own that they want to do it. But here's the thing, that chart that I showed you, the map rather that I showed you before that showed all these like awful high prices in the Miracle Mile area, that is a very, very good predictor that if the zoning rules were changed, that developers and investors would build new housing. That there's very clear, strong demand there, and developers are in the business of meeting that demand. Now, the other thing I would say, though, is that the housing affordability requirements and the tenant protections, those are mandatory. Like, the city has laws like this that either govern different parts of the city, or in the case of tenant protections, they have some tenant protections, but they're not as weak. They're not as strong. But those are the law. You have to comply with them if you're a builder.
Yeah, I think another useful framing I just want to share again is that the TMP is essentially a final implementation of JJJ in a sense, because Measure JJJ got us the TOC program, but the city's plan now is through these transit neighborhood plans and through the community plan process to incorporate TOC into these plans, and then to essentially eventually supersede the program through these local applications of it. So that really helped my framing, because in essence, we have the TOC program now, and there's TOC projects that we see in the area. I think the question is, if we're going to do something in this area as a TMP, what can we add to that so that we're getting, I fully agree that not everything that gets built next to transit is really transit oriented. So one, how do we make that happen? Like, how do we essentially improve upon the TOC program that way? And two, can we make the TOC program work even better? Can we add protections for existing renters, like Anthony pointed out earlier? So thinking about it, implementing that way, that's just another, that's been another angle about this that has helped me.
Perfect. Thank y'all so much. What I'm going to add to that is also, we all have to remind ourselves as just as Angelenos, we don't actually also always have to figure out all of the answers either. That's what we pay our city council members and their staff for. The fact that even all of us are here and creating our own plan, it just speaks to people power. But in terms of enforcement, it's, that's what we will hopefully work out and iron out with our advocacy with those who can actually make this change, because they're going to know the legalities and things way better than the four of us, or really the 40 of us probably will know. And again, I think that's just the power of all of us getting together and like advocating for this plan so that we can, to Michelle's point, make it enforceable. As an urban planner by trade, something we always say is we don't want a plan that sits on a shelf. And I think that a plan like this is definitely the kind that is implementable. With that being said, we don't have any more questions, and I promise folks, a good hour. I like to stick to my word with time. If no one else has any questions, I'll let everyone go enjoy their pre-Friday, as I like to call Thursdays, and I hope everyone has an amazing weekend. And again, we'll send out all the resources. Also, if all the panelists want to turn back on their videos and wish everyone a final goodbye, feel free to do so. Also, before I forget, thank you to Esteban, our communications manager, Stephanie, our organizing intern, who's also on her video's been off. Thank you to Alex and Margaret, our other organizing interns, and to Mehmet, Lauren, Mark, Henry, who couldn't be here, for their help in making this happen. And then, of course, Leonora and Anthony for all the great work they've also done as staff. Thank you, everyone, and have a good night.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.